Doctor Who has been a cultural icon of British television since its inception in the early 1960s, with the show bringing in millions for the BBC in both pounds and viewing figures each year. The show is one of the longest lasting sci-fi series of all time, celebrating its 60th anniversary last year, and even releasing new episodes to this day, with the show's latest season starring Ncuti Gatwa and Millie Gibson airing this year. Of course, with the show as beloved and long-lasting as Doctor Who, there inevitably comes something that is the bane of archivists and fans of the show everywhere: lost media. Doctor Who has some of the most infamous examples of lost media, due to the BBC's infamous junking policies in the 1960s and 70s, causing multiple episodes of the show from that era to become lost. So today, in honour of Doctor Who's latest season and just over 60 years of timey-wimey goodness, we're going to take a look at 5 pieces of Doctor Who lost media, including a strange bonus entry that might not even exist, and of course, spoilers. The Parting of the Ways, alternate ending. After Doctor Who's cancellation in 1989, and after the release of the 1996 made-for-TV Doctor Who movie, the BBC commissioned a new series of the show, which released in 2005 to massive success, catapulting the franchise to even bigger levels of success than it had ever seen before. This was the era of the show I grew up on, and seriously, if you're around at this time, you know just how inescapable Doctor Who truly was back then. I mean, you had Doctor Who action figures, Doctor Who trading cards, mugs, cakes, yogurts, basically anything the BBC could slap a Doctor Who logo on and make some money with was produced to celebrate the return of this sci-fi television classic. The inaugural 13-episode series of the revival followed the 9th incarnation of the Doctor, played by Christopher Eccleston, and his companion Rose Tyler, played by Billie Piper, as they fought off alien threats and travelled through time and space in the TARDIS. The first series culminated in the 2-part finale Bad Wolf and the Parting of the Ways, which sees the Doctor battle an army of Daleks led by the Dalek Emperor, alongside his companions to stop them from conquering the universe after they invade the game station. The episode, as it aired on TV, concludes with Rose looking into the heart of the TARDIS and absorbing its power, becoming the Bad Wolf. She uses her newfound power to wipe out the Dalek army and revive Captain Jack Harkness, who was killed earlier in the episode. However, Rose is unable to contain the Time Vortex's power and her mind begins to burn. The Doctor heroically sacrifices his life by absorbing the Time Vortex from Rose, and when the two return to the TARDIS, the Doctor explains the process of regeneration to Rose before regenerating into his 10th incarnation, played by David Tennant, who would go on to play the character for many years to come. But this wasn't the only ending filmed for the episode. Infamously known to Doctor Who fans, Christopher Eccleston did not return for the second series of the show due to issues he had with the production and with writer and showrunner Russell T Davies. In October 2019, Eccleston stated at New York Comic Con that, "I left because my relationship with the showrunner and the producer broke down. I left because of the politics of the show. I left only because of those 3 individuals and the way they were running the show. I loved playing the character and I loved the world. I felt I'm going to play the Doctor my way and I'm not going to get involved in these politics, and that wasn't workable, so off I went and became the Invisible Man." An alternate ending for the episode had been filmed for press screenings to avoid spoiling Eccleston's departure from the show and the fact that the Doctor would regenerate in the finale. However, this would ultimately prove to be pointless, as the BBC press office revealed Eccleston's departure from the show earlier than expected, making it obvious that the Doctor would indeed regenerate in the final episode of the series. The alternate ending would be mostly similar to the one used in the actual episode, except it would not feature the Doctor's death and regeneration at the end. Instead, the Doctor would have the TARDIS scan Rose after she had lost the powers of the Time Vortex, with the TARDIS displaying the message "Life Form Dying," providing a cliffhanger for the second series to continue off of. There is no footage or even a script available for this scene, and the only reason we're even aware of its existence is because of an interview with Russell T Davies from Doctor Who magazine. Davies said that he considered the false ending to be inferior to the one that was used in the actual episode, but said that it might be suitable as a DVD extra someday. However, the DVD release came and went, with no sign of the scene. The only other mention of the scene from a credible source is on the DVD commentary of the episode, where executive producer Julie Gardner mentions that the ending featured the death of Rose, and most likely wouldn't be released on DVD. Gardner mentioning that Rose dies in the alternate ending is really interesting, because in the interview given to Doctor Who magazine, Russell T Davies just mentions the message saying that Rose is dying, not that she actually dies in this version of the ending. Since this ending was not made with the intention of ever making it to the broadcasted version of the episode, we don't know which recollection of it is more accurate, Davies or Gardner, and it is doubtful any recordings from an unofficial source would exist. The only way I could see the scene ever being found is maybe through some sort of leak or official release from Russell T Davies or the BBC. Since this ending was only ever intended for the press and was never meant to be an official canon ending, I'm doubtful an official release will happen, and it's likely that the contents of the scene will remain a mystery, as the footage is probably buried deep within the archives of the BBC. Planet of Giants, The Urge to Live. One of the most famous examples of lost media of any kind is the lost episodes of Doctor Who from the first 6 years of the show's original run. This happened due to a policy the BBC had of wiping or taping over their old TV shows in order to make room in their archives for newer shows, or junking as it's more commonly referred to. This has caused many episodes of the show to become lost, and even though some survive through stills, production images and animated remakes, since the audio of all episodes has been archived, there are still 97 episodes of the original Doctor Who series lost to this day. However, the fourth episode of the second season serial Planet of Giants, titled The Urge to Live, is slightly different than the rest of the lost episodes of Doctor Who, as this episode will most likely remain lost forever. Why, you ask? Well, it's because the episode never even made it to broadcast. To understand the convoluted history of this lost episode, we must go back all the way to 1963 and the very first episode of Doctor Who, which is now known to be an unearthly child. However, this wasn't the original plan for the show. Filmed as part of the first production block of the show, Planet of Giants was set to kick off the show in 1963 until the then producer of the show, Verity Lambert, decided that the serial didn't provide enough characterization for an opening episode. The episode was subsequently moved to the second series and was set to be the premiere episode for that series of the show. When this was decided, the head of serials of the BBC at the time, Donald Wilson, made it clear that he was not a fan of this serial. He preferred the second serial planned for the series, The Dalek Invasion of Earth, and thought that it would serve better as a series opener than Planet of Giants. But there was a slight problem with this. The character of Susan, the Doctor's granddaughter and the first companion of the Doctor, leaves the show at the end of The Dalek Invasion of Earth, but appears in Planet of Giants, making the two episodes impossible to rearrange. Wilson then had an idea of how they could change Planet of Giants so that it could still be used as the opening episode of the second series. He proposed leaving the first two parts of the serial intact, but editing the third and fourth parts together into one episode, retaining the episode's original title, Crisis. The end result was an episode that, although feeling a little rushed, was a strong debut for the second series of the show, bringing in good viewing figures and getting mostly good reviews. But this also resulted in almost all of the footage from the fourth part, The Urge to Live, going unused, as only small parts of the original episode were used in the re-edited episode Crisis. The removal of the final part of Planet of Giants opened up a free slot in the production schedule that was filled with a prologue episode to the 12-part serial The Daleks' Master Plan, called Mission to the Unknown, that ironically enough also ended up becoming lost. Since the original version of The Urge to Live was never aired on TV, making home recordings an impossibility, and the original footage was destroyed due to the BBC's junking policies, the episode will most likely never see the light of day. The closest thing we have to the episode is a reconstruction created for the DVD release of the Planet of Giants serial, and a documentary about the reconstruction's creation. This reconstruction was made using production stills, and by bringing in the surviving actors from the original show to reprise their roles, with William Russell and Carol Ann Ford reprising their roles as Ian and Susan respectively. It is a shame that the actual episode is likely gone forever, since it was actually some of the first work on the show by director Douglas Camfield, who went on to direct episodes such as the aforementioned Dalek's Master Plan and Terror of the Zygons, which is one of the most iconic episodes of the show's classic era. He even cast Nicholas Courtney in the role of the Brigadier, who is one of the most popular and memorable characters in the show's entire run, so it's sad that we'll most likely never see some of the earliest work from someone who contributed a lot to this show's rich history. Doctor Who Journey into Time. Journey into Time was the pilot for a mysterious radio show that was planned for Doctor Who in the 1960s, which was to be a collaboration between Stanmark Productions and Watermill Productions. The only actor that has been confirmed to be a part of this radio show is Peter Cushing, who would have starred in the titular role of the Doctor. Now, the first question that's probably come to your mind is, didn't Peter Cushing play the Doctor in those two weird Doctor Who movies from the 60s? And you'd be right. Peter Cushing portrayed the character Doctor Who in the two non-canon Doctor Who films, Doctor Who and the Daleks and Daleks Invasion Earth 2150 AD. This version of the character was a human inventor from Earth who creates a time machine called TARDIS instead of being a Time Lord from Gallifrey who steals a TARDIS to travel the universe. However, it's assumed that the version of the Doctor that Cushing was playing in the radio series was not the same as the one he played in the two non-canon movies, as the advertising for the radio show makes no mention of the movie and only mentions the show. The plot details we have from the pilot also seem to be some sort of strange fusion of the movies and the show. It is also known that Cushing wasn't actually the first choice to play the Doctor in this show, with Frankenstein's monster actor Boris Karloff being the original choice for the role until he turned it down. The pilot followed a character named Mike who finds out that a classmate of his named Susan and her grandfather, Doctor Who, are humans from the distant future where time travel is possible, and Doctor Who and Susan use their time machine, the TARDIS, to travel back in time to the 1960s. Doctor Who, Mike and Susan all travel back to the American Revolution in the pilot, and when Mike asks the Doctor to return home at the end of their adventure, it is revealed neither Doctor Who or Susan can control where or when the TARDIS lands. This pilot was one of 52 episodes planned for this radio series, and it was the only one to have been produced. However, the series did not receive any further development and the pilot was recorded but never aired. A note of rejection from the head of sound drama at the BBC during the pilot's production reads, "As a typical commercial production for unsophisticated listeners in Australia or even some parts of the United States, it sounds up quite well. As a piece of science fiction, however, it strikes me as extremely feeble." I don't know why he felt the need to roast Australians or Americans, but I guess he wasn't the biggest fan of the pilot episode. With regards to material that we have from this pilot, there's actually some available to the public. The script, written by Malcolm Hulke, was found in the BBC archives in 2012 by Doctor Who magazine writer Richard Bignell, and was made publicly available in his fan magazine Nothing at the End of the Lane. When the script was found in 2012, Beermat Productions produced a fan adaptation of it, which is available on their website. Additionally, some trade advertisements supposedly exist out there, but I was unable to find them online in my research. Doctor Who historian David J. Howe made many attempts to learn more about the pilot's production in 1989, including writing to Stan Mark's overseas distributors and to the address listed on the trade advertisements, as well as Peter Cushing's agent. However, all of these leads proved to be dead ends. Bignell did say that there is some hope for the pilot to be found, as there are at least 2 copies of it that have been made to his knowledge. However, neither of these 2 supposed copies have surfaced, and the actual official recording of the pilot itself remains lost to this day. Doctor Who, Sega Mega Drive. Now for a shorter entry on our list, we have a very mysterious game that was supposedly planned to be released in the 1990s based on Doctor Who. By the year 1994, Doctor Who had been off the air for 5 years, and rumours of a movie based on the sci-fi series were arising. Around this same time, the August 1994 issue of Mean Machines, a magazine from the 90s in the UK that focused on gaming news, released an article stating that a Doctor Who video game for the Sega Mega Drive, or Genesis as it's known in America, was in development. There's virtually no information available on this game, with the Mean Machines article being the only mention of its existence. The small paragraph in the magazine that claims the game was in development at the time states that Sega themselves were developing the game, and that they were using multiple different references to come up with a background story. They also say that they were unsure what aspects of the show the game would pull from, or if it would be based off the, at the time, rumoured Doctor Who movie, which would of course release in May 1996, starring Paul McGann as the 8th Doctor. The only Doctor Who game to be released in the 90s on any system after this magazine article was released was Doctor Who Destiny of the Doctors, which was released on Windows PCs in 1997. However, this was a 3D game, making a port to the Mega Drive very unlikely, if not impossible, due to the technical limitations that the Mega Drive had relative to PCs at the time. And that's pretty much all the information we have on this supposed game. Outside of this magazine, there's no evidence to account for the game's existence, and I'm skeptical as to the validity of this little magazine snippet since there's literally nothing else online that proves this game exists. There's no screenshots, no builds, no gameplay footage, no interviews with developers who worked on the game. There's nothing, aside from this one small excerpt from the magazine. I very much doubt a build of this game exists in any sort of playable state, since we have no evidence to suggest that the game even made it that far into development. And given the quality of most Doctor Who video games, it would have been very interesting to see the game and if it would have been any good. The game supposedly being developed by a reputable developer such as Sega does bode well for how good it could have been, but it also raises a few eyebrows for me. At the time this article was written, Doctor Who was already cancelled and wasn't the most popular show at the time. It doesn't make a huge amount of sense to me for Sega to be wanting to invest money in a game based on a cancelled and, at the time, unpopular TV show, but who knows, Sega isn't exactly a stranger to making weird business decisions. Until some sort of gameplay, screenshots or build of the game is released, if they even exist, we'll never truly know what Sega had planned for this Doctor Who video game for the Sega Mega Drive. Doctor Who IR Guru's video game. Speaking of Doctor Who video games, and coming full circle to our first entry on the list, we're going to be talking about the 2005 revival of Doctor Who once again, and a video game that was once in development for this incarnation of the show. In 2003, the BBC announced the return of Doctor Who with a reboot in 2005, with Christopher Eccleston and Billie Piper being cast in their respective roles in May of 2004. Later that year, rumours began to emerge of a Doctor Who video game being developed based on the rebooted version of the show, with Games Radar reporting in December 2004 that the game would be developed on behalf of BBC Worldwide by IR Gurus, a small developer based out of Australia. The Games Radar report made it seem as if this Doctor Who game was in active development and would definitely see the light of day. However, a week later, the BBC Worldwide Head of Communications, Andy Widger, told Games Radar that, quote, "The news of a Doctor Who game is a little premature. At present, the only work being done on it is an interactive demo for internal evaluation. There is no firm proposal for a game and no commitment to particular formats or an idea of a potential release date, and no screenshots." Based on this statement, it sounds like the idea of a game was up in the air, but there was still some development being done on a playable demo of some sort for the BBC to evaluate and decide if they wanted to move forward with it. After this statement, there was radio silence from this project for years until April 2011, when a former employee of IR Gurus, Paul Callaghan, discussed the game and its short development with the Sydney Morning Herald, an Australian newspaper company. He spoke about how the game was a dream project of his since he was 11 years old, and how the biggest struggle of the game was making the Doctor's companion an active part of the gameplay. He even hinted at some story details from the game that involved Rose getting powers from airborne nanobots that affected the human race due to some sort of alien plot. However, based on his wording from the interview, it's unclear as to whether Paul made these details up on the spot, or if they were actually from the initial plans for the game. We know that the game was in development for at least 6 months before its cancellation, and when asked why the game was cancelled, Paul simply responded with, "It's complicated," and provided no further details. My guess is that the demo that IR Gurus made wasn't up to the standard that the BBC expected, so they decided to scrap the game as it probably wasn't worth the time or money they'd have to put into it to get it up to scratch. Andy Widger of the BBC did say there were no commitments to formats or platforms, but based on the timing of the game's development, it's probably likely that the game would have been for the original Xbox, PS2, Wii, PC, or the Xbox 360, or any combination of those systems, since those were the currently available platforms at the time. Based on all this information, we do know that the game was definitely in development, and a somewhat playable demo of the game does exist. However, nothing from this game has surfaced past the interview with the IR Gurus developer and the BBC's statement regarding the game. There is no footage or screenshots from this supposed build, and the demo itself is not available anywhere on the internet. As far as finding anything from this game goes, the best bet of us getting the chance to play the demo is probably an IR Gurus developer leaking it, or if someone manages to find the game on some sort of development kit. Doctor Who and the Monsters of Ness 1991 pilot. So throughout this list, we've had a look at lost video games, radio dramas, and episodes from Doctor Who, but did you know there was apparently a completely separate reboot that was being planned in 1991 and is lost? Well, not exactly. This is one of the weirdest and most obscure stories I've ever read surrounding Doctor Who, and surrounding lost media in general. It's so absurd I didn't even think it was true. I always figured it was some sort of myth or urban legend that was circulated around the fandom during the years the show was dormant between the cancellation of the series and the release of the 1996 movie. But no, this is a story that has been referenced by somewhat official sources, although I'm very, very skeptical as to its validity. So, what exactly was this thing? Well, an actor and radio personality by the name of David Burton claimed that in 1991 he had starred in 2 episodes for a story called Doctor Who and the Monsters of Ness. He claimed that some creative liberties were taken with the episodes he had filmed, such as replacing the Doctor's blue police box with a red phone box, as the people making it felt that not enough people would remember the original blue box, you know, one of the most iconic props from the whole show, and having the Doctor's companion be 2 original characters who were twins called Heart and Diamond. It was also said that these episodes were not produced by the BBC and were instead an independent production commissioned by the BBC, and that all the copies of these supposed episodes were destroyed after it was decided that this wasn't the direction that they wanted to take. There are 2 known interviews where Burton discusses the existence of these episodes, one conducted in 1991 with Doctor Who magazine, and one conducted in 2012 for a documentary called Doctor Forever, Lost in the Dark Dimension. This was a documentary that discussed the ways in which the show was kept alive during the time period when it was cancelled. I'd mentioned earlier that this pilot was referenced by some official sources, and this interview was what I was talking about. The Doctor Forever documentary was released as part of the Doctor Who Inferno Special Edition DVD, as well as on the official Doctor Who YouTube channel. There is absolutely no evidence outside of Burton's own word that anything from this reboot exists, and there's no evidence that the BBC ever even commissioned a reboot of any kind in the early 90s. No one has come forward and claimed that they were associated with the production of these episodes, with the exception of Burton, and the BBC have never commented on the validity of his claims. This has led hardcore fans of Doctor Who to speculate and come up with their own theories as to what this reboot is, and generally there are 3 accepted theories within the fandom. The first theory states that this was a top secret production that the BBC scrapped, destroying everything associated with it once the plans to move it forward were cancelled in favour of making the 1996 movie. The second theory is that this was an obscure fan production and David Burton just didn't understand this before filming, and that he genuinely believed he was going to be the next official Doctor. The third, and most convincing theory to me, is that Burton made this whole story up in order to get a free car. Funnily enough, there's more evidence to suggest that this theory is true than to suggest that the pilot actually exists. Richard Bignell wrote a great article on the Nothing at the End of the Lane website, which I'll link in the description, summarising why this theory is most likely true and pointing out all the holes in David Burton's story. I'll try and summarise the key points here. In the interview that Burton gave in 2012, he said that he had worked on a play with director Paul Bernard, and a few months after starring in the play, Paul contacted Burton and asked him to meet at the Grosvenor House Hotel to discuss a new project. Burton claimed that this is when Paul told him that he wanted him to play the Doctor, and that this new project was a pilot for a Doctor Who reboot. Unfortunately, Paul passed away in 1997, but in the years between the supposed filming of the pilot and Paul's death, he never mentioned the project in any interview, and Richard Bignell contacted Paul's wife, who looked through his work diaries and found absolutely no mention of these episodes being in Paul's schedule. This story was contradicted by an earlier interview that Burton gave in Doctor Who magazine, stating that he had been contacted by a London production company called Millennium Productions about the pilot, and not Paul Bernard. There were apparently 2 companies that used this name in the 90s, but neither of them have any record of producing anything involving Doctor Who. Burton's recollection of the location where the pilot was shot also changed across the various interviews given by him. In 1991, Burton stated that the pilot had been shot in Vienna, Austria. However, in 2012, he listed various different locations, none of which included Vienna, with one being Chilhurst Caves. These caves have been used for multiple TV and film projects, but, strangely enough, when the staff at the caves were contacted, they had absolutely no recollection of anything Doctor Who related being shot there in the late 80s or early 90s. The last piece of evidence that suggests Burton's story is all made up is what happened to the car that he received due to this ludicrous story. Burton was given a Proton Saga by the now defunct Shield Motor Group, after Burton had approached them directly seeking sponsorship for a new car. He did this by claiming to have been cast as the new star of Doctor Who, and by supposedly bringing along various pieces of documentation as proof that this was true. There's even a photo of Burton outside the dealership, standing next to the car that has some branding for the dealership on it, as well as the text "David Burton, the new Doctor," written on the side of the car. However, in 2016, someone who worked for the dealership at the time told Nothing at the End of the Lane that Burton never delivered on the supposed proof that he would be the next Doctor, so they terminated the deal after about 4 months and ended up taking the car back from outside his house using the spare key. With all of this evidence stacked against it, I'm basically 100% sure that this pilot doesn't exist in any form. David Burton is the only person who seems to remember anything about whatever this thing is, and he contradicted himself so many times that it makes it very unconvincing to me that this pilot was ever made. The fact that the dealership even remembers taking the car back from Burton, with the workers saying he kept messing them about for weeks, shows that David Burton seems to be a pretty shady character, all things considered. Even with all this evidence stacked against it, could you imagine if it one day surfaces and we actually get to see what this supposed thing even was? I think my mind would be blown if that ever actually happened. I guess, until it does, it will remain as one of the strangest existence unconfirmed pieces of media that I've ever read about, and will live on in infamy as the 1991 Doctor Who reboot that probably never even existed in the first place. Thanks for watching. If you guys enjoyed this video, be sure to hit the like button down below, be sure to hit the subscribe button for more videos like this in the future, and if you guys have any topics that you'd like me to cover, be sure to leave them down in the comments below and I'll be sure to take them into consideration. So once again, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you guys next time. Goodbye.